The bookstore smelled of cinnamon coffee and old pages, a scent Evelyn Reed had grown to rely on, like armor. Nestled on a familiar corner of South Side Chicago, the shop was more than a business. It was sanctuary. Evelyn was in her early 30s, black, brilliant, beautiful, and emotionally done. The kind of done that didn't need clarifying. The kind of done that came after loving too hard, too long, and too blindly. She had once given her all to a man who made promises with soft lips and wandering eyes. A man who spoke of forever, but treated her like a placeholder until something better came along. And when it did, or rather when he thought it did, he ghosted her with nothing more than a text message and a cruel line she'd never forget. "You're great, Eve. Just not the kind of woman I see in my future." That line lived rent-free in her chest. After that, she stopped entertaining hope. Dates became meaningless. Romance novels stayed on the shelves, never opened. To anyone who asked, she said, "Love is for fiction. Ideal in real life." But even as she said it, even as she chuckled with customers and poured tea for her elders during community events, her eyes told a quieter story. A tired one. Because the truth was, Evelyn hadn't stopped believing in love. She just stopped believing it was meant for her. Have you ever given your heart to someone who made you feel like an option? Drop a heart in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because this one's about second chances you never saw coming. Every morning, Evelyn unlocked the shop by 8:15 a.m. sharp. Never a minute later. The chime above the door sang out as she stepped inside, greeted by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, framed photos of her late mother, and the cozy hum of a space built from grit, grief, and grace. The bookstore, read between the lines, wasn't just a name. It was a legacy. Out back, through a narrow hallway, lived a little reading nook where kids sprawled. Out after school, noses buried in comic books and coming-of-age stories. She hosted author nights, poetry readings, and Black History spotlights. Each event bringing in neighbors who treated each other like family. She didn't wear designer clothes or move through glass towers. Her life moved to the rhythm of gospel songs humming from the radio, the clatter of ceramic, mugs from the cafe next door, and her own quiet voice reminding herself she was enough. She still missed her mother, Lorraine Reed, a woman who worked double shifts as a nurse, kept her Bible close, and never let life's weight make her bitter. Lorraine had raised Evelyn alone, never once mentioning a man, a boyfriend, or a father. Not once. And Evelyn never asked. Because when you grow up watching your mother carry the world on her back, you assume she doesn't need help, and neither should you. But every now and then, Evelyn would stare at her reflection in the glass front of the shop and wonder, where did I get these eyes? She shook the thought away most days. She was content, wasn't she? It started with headlights. A sleek black sedan rolled to a slow stop outside her shop, the kind of car that didn't belong on her block. Folks around here drove what they could maintain. Nothing about this vehicle said regular visitor. It gleamed like it had never seen dust, never known potholes, never touched a Chicago winter. Evelyn frowned from behind the counter. Customers came and went. Delivery trucks stopped. But this was new. The driver's door opened with a soft thud. Out stepped a tall white man, dressed in a navy suit sharper than anything she had ever seen up close. His posture was straight, confident, and entirely out of place among cracked sidewalks and mom-and-pop storefronts. He paused at the entrance, took a small breath, then pushed the door open. Chime. Her heart kicked once, a quiet warning she didn't yet understand. "Miss Reed?" he asked. His voice was calm, steady, but carrying a hesitation that made her skin prickle. He wasn't here for a book. He wasn't here for an event. Something about him felt official, heavy. "Yes. Can I help you?" she replied slowly. The man stepped further inside, careful, respectful. He removed a leather folder from his coat and held it with both hands. "My name is Wesley Grant," he said. "I'm an attorney with Thorne and Caldwell. I came on behalf of the estate of Marcus Thorne." Evelyn blinked again. The name meant nothing to her. Her breath hitched anyway. "I think you might have the wrong person," she said, gripping the counter for stability. Wesley shook his head gently. "No, ma'am. I'm certain. I've spent the past 3 weeks confirming every detail." He opened the folder. Her stomach flipped. Something inside her, old, buried and uninvited, whispered a warning. "Your mother kept something from you." Wesley's gaze softened. "I know this is unexpected, but Miss Reed, this is not a mistake." Her throat dried. "Why are you here?" she asked finally. Wesley hesitated, just a second, as though the words themselves could crack the air. "To inform you," he said carefully, "that Marcus Thorne left his entire estate to his biological daughter." He let the words settle. "You," he added. Evelyn's chest went still. She stared at Wesley as if he'd spoken a language she didn't recognize. What did you say?" Wesley's voice dropped, lower now, gentler. "Marcus Thorne was your biological father." The bookstore fell into silence. No page turning, no footsteps, no register beeping. Just silence, so complete it felt like time had taken a step back. Evelyn blinked. Once. Twice. "No," she whispered. "That's not. My mother never. She would have told me." Wesley didn't flinch. He just stood there, grounded in the kind of truth that changed everything. "She didn't," he said softly, "but she signed legal documents that confirmed paternity, and she specifically requested that Mr. Thorne stay away." A memory rushed forward like a wave breaking too soon. Her mother, sitting weak in a hospital bed, trying to say something, then swallowing the words and turning away. At the time, Evelyn assumed it was fear of dying. But now she wasn't sure what her mother had taken with her to the grave. "I don't believe you," she said, voice brittle. Wesley reached into his folder and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside are letters he wrote, a copy of the paternity agreement, and medical records showing he tried to reach out again before he passed. She didn't move, didn't reach, didn't breathe. Her eyes dropped to the envelope, but her hands stayed clenched by her sides. "This doesn't make sense," she murmured. "I know," Wesley said, his voice nearly a whisper now. "But the truth rarely does, especially when it's been hidden this long." A beat passed, then another. Her grip loosened on the worn paperback she'd been shelving. It slipped from her fingers, hit the hardwood floor, and landed with a quiet thud. She didn't pick it up. Couldn't. Because in that moment, Evelyn Reed's entire life, the one built on her mother's strength, on silence, on assumed truths, cracked open with one sentence. "He was your father." Wesley didn't press her. He gave Evelyn time, a kindness she hadn't expected. After a long, quiet pause, he gently placed the envelope of documents on the front counter. "There's more," he said. "Marcus Thorne left everything to you." She looked up, eyes glassy. "Everything?" He nodded. "The estate, business assets, properties, savings, and something else he couldn't put in a will, his regret." Her legs nearly gave out. It wasn't about money, not for her. It was about the years she spent thinking she was just an afterthought, a daughter of no one, a woman raised in a world where men disappeared and women held it all together. Now some billionaire she never met wanted to rewrite that story, with wealth, with apologies, with legacies he never shared. Why? Why now? Why her? Her mother had her reasons, of that she was sure. But standing in her shop, surrounded by books that told other people's stories, Evelyn couldn't ignore the truth. Her story had just begun. Wesley took a step back, leaving the envelope behind. "If you need time, take it," he said. "But Miss Reed, there's a reason I came to you in person. You deserve to hear it face to face." She didn't reply. Couldn't. He nodded once, then turned and left, the bell over the door chiming again as the wind rolled in behind him. Evelyn didn't move. Not for minutes. She just stood there, staring at the envelope, at the truth, at the life she thought was final, now opening a new chapter she never expected to read. Evelyn Reed stood frozen behind the counter, the soft thud of the paperback she had dropped echoing too loudly in her quiet bookstore. Her fingers twitched at her sides. Her mouth stayed slightly open. Her eyes stayed locked on the door Wesley Grant had just walked out of. For a moment, she wondered if it had really happened. The man, the folder, the words. Marcus Thorne. Her father. Her entire body pulsed with disbelief. She bent slowly to pick up the book she'd dropped, The Warmth of Other Suns. She held it like it might steady her, but her hands trembled. The smell of roasted beans from the cafe next door drifted in like it always did. But today, it made her sick. Her stomach was tight. Her skin felt too small. And her thoughts, they were loud and chaotic. Marcus Thorne. An estate. A legacy. Biological father. The terms floated like ash in the air. She had no room to catch them. She reached under the counter, pulled out the tiny stool she used during long shifts, and sat, still holding the book, still staring at the empty doorway. Marcus Thorne, she said aloud, testing it. It felt foreign on her tongue, like a stranger's name. Because it was. And yet, if Wesley was telling the truth, her throat ached as a single hot tear escaped down her cheek. Not from sadness. Not yet. From shock. She wiped it quickly, almost offended at herself for feeling anything at all. But deep down, she knew this. Nothing about her life would be the same again. She didn't know him. Didn't know his face, his voice, his scent, or how he walked. He had never appeared at her childhood birthdays, never clapped from the crowd during her 8th grade spelling bee, never called when she graduated high school with honors. Not once. So why did the name Marcus Thorne now weigh so heavily in her chest? She turned the envelope Wesley had left on the counter and stared at the name. Printed on the top line, Marcus D. Thorne, estate packet, confidential. It looked clinical, legal, cold. Yet, it sent a sharp pain down her spine. Her mother had never spoken his name, not even once in all her 33 years. He was a non-person, a void. A silhouette she had never dared to fill in with imagination. Whenever the topic of Evelyn's father came up, Lorraine simply said, "He's not someone worth talking about," and changed the subject with a finality that couldn't be questioned. So Evelyn stopped asking. Until now. Now this stranger's name was attached to properties, accounts, stocks, and a heartache she didn't know she was allowed to feel. And that was the worst part. Was she even allowed to feel something for a man she never knew? Or was she betraying her mother just by being curious? Evelyn sat in her reading nook, the same one she had decorated with fairy lights and black fiction classics, holding a cup of untouched tea. She stared into it, seeing her mother's face more clearly than she had in weeks. Lorraine's laugh during a Sunday gospel show, the deep crease in her brow when Evelyn stayed out too late. Her steady hands adjusting Evelyn's collar before job interviews. Her mother had been everything. How could she have kept this secret? Evelyn pressed a hand to her chest as a strange ache bloomed beneath her ribs. Not anger. Not yet. Just a sharp, aching question. Why? Her heart tugged in two directions. One toward the woman who had raised her, protected her, and never asked for anything in return. And the other toward the man who had apparently watched from a distance and now, in death, was trying to make contact. She felt disloyal for even considering it. But curiosity didn't care about loyalty. It crept into her bones, whispering questions in the quietest corners of her mind. Who was Marcus Thorne? Why did he stay away? What kind of man writes letters and never sends them? And worst of all, what if he wasn't the monster her silence had painted him to be? Wesley returned the next morning. He didn't knock dramatically or announce himself with legal flair. He stepped in quietly, holding the same folder, and met her eyes without expectation. Evelyn said nothing as she led him to the back nook. They sat, and for a long time she let the silence hang. A test. Would he break it? Would he push? He didn't. Finally, she exhaled. My mother requested he stay away. Wesley nodded once. Yes. She looked down at her hands. Why? I can't answer that, he said gently. All I know is, when Marcus tried to initiate contact, legally, she pushed back. There were signed papers, notarized. She made it clear, Evelyn shook her head slowly. That doesn't make sense. She always said she wanted the best for me. Why keep me from him? From knowing? Wesley leaned forward just slightly. Sometimes people make hard choices, even the good ones. But she lied, Evelyn said, her voice cracking. Wesley didn't correct her, because he couldn't. Evelyn felt the betrayal pierce her chest, and yet she still defended her mother internally, still heard her voice in her head. I did what I had to do, baby. But now she wasn't sure. Maybe Lorraine had tried to protect her, or maybe she'd tried to protect herself. The envelope sat unopened beside her. The letters, the proof, the pieces of a man's life, a man who shared her blood but not her memories. She stared at it until her eyes blurred. Wesley watched her, patient. Finally, Evelyn reached for it. Slow, deliberate. She didn't open it yet. But she placed her hand on top of it and looked at Wesley. I want to know what's inside, she said. But I'm not promising anything beyond that. Wesley nodded. That's more than fair. And I'm not doing this to chase money, she added quickly. That's not what this is. He held her gaze. I believe you. She softened just a little. But if I'm going to open this door, she said quietly, I need you to walk through it with me. That part surprised even her, but it was true. There was something about Wesley Grant, not flashy, not fake, just present, steady. He nodded again, slower this time. I'll be here, as long as you need me. That night, Evelyn lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, the envelope resting. On her nightstand, like a ghost she invited in but hadn't addressed, the hum of traffic outside her apartment window gave way to memory. She was back in the hospital room, her mother's final days. Lorraine's body had grown fragile, but her spirit never cracked. Until one evening when she stared at Evelyn for a long, long time. I want to tell you something, Lorraine had whispered. Evelyn, sitting by her bedside, leaned in. Okay, what is it? Lorraine had looked away, swallowed hard. No, never mind, she said, her voice dry. Are you sure? Evelyn had asked gently, sensing something big. Lorraine turned her head toward the window. Some things are better left where they belong. Evelyn hadn't pressed. She figured it was just another lesson, one of many her mother offered without explanation. But now, lying alone with that unopened envelope, Evelyn realized that was the moment her mother almost told her. About him, about everything, and she didn't. And now Evelyn would never hear it from her lips. Only from paper, only from strangers, only from a life that had been lived next to hers, but never with her. Her eyes stung. She didn't wipe them. She turned toward the envelope and whispered into the dark, Okay, I'll open it. And just like that, the first wall cracked. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the manila envelope on her nightstand, like it might open itself and start talking. Her mind flipped between disbelief and cautious surrender, back and forth until the morning sun painted shadows on her bedroom wall. By the time her bookstore opened, she was running on caffeine and adrenaline. At precisely 10:03 a.m., the front door chimed. Wesley stood there again. Same navy coat, same calm expression, but something gentler in his posture this time, like he knew today would carry more weight than yesterday. I brought what we discussed, he said quietly. Evelyn nodded and locked the door behind him. She had flipped the closed for inventory sign an hour early, not because she planned to do inventory, but because she didn't want anyone else witnessing whatever this day might unravel. They sat in the reading nook again. Wesley opened a new folder. Inside were legal documents, notarized forms, and a stack of aged letters tied together with a thin navy ribbon. He placed them in front of her. These, he said, were all addressed to you. He wrote them over the years but never sent them. Some are dated as far back as when you were 6. Evelyn's throat tightened. She reached out, untied the ribbon, and stared at the top letter. The handwriting was masculine but refined, looping in places, sharp in others. The date read, June 4th, 1998. She ran her fingers over the ink, like it could connect her to a past she didn't live. Then she picked it up and began to read. She started with the earliest one. Dear Evelyn, today you turned 6. I don't know if you like cake, but your mother used to love strawberry shortcake with real whipped cream. Evelyn blinked hard. She continued reading aloud. I stood outside the school once, just to see your face. You had a red backpack. You were laughing. I had to walk away quickly. It didn't feel right, not when I had no permission to be there. Evelyn's voice broke. She handed the letter to Wesley without looking up and reached for another. This one, written years later, was darker. You're almost a teenager now. I wonder if you hate me. You should. I would. But I hope, maybe one day, when you're older, you'll want to know the whole story. Her hands trembled as she turned the page. Another letter was full of apologies. One was defensive. Another talked about how he hoped she was being raised in kindness, how he regretted not fighting harder. Some letters made her eyes sting. Others made her grip the paper like it had betrayed her, because in between love and longing there were excuses. There were years. There were gaps that no letter could fill. Why write these and not send them? She asked bitterly, holding one that ended with, maybe next year I'll try again. Wesley exhaled. Because he wasn't sure if it would help, or if it would hurt more, Evelyn didn't respond. She just folded the last letter she'd read and set it aside like something sacred and infuriating all at once. The legal packet was next. Wesley laid it out carefully. A copy of the official document dated nearly 3 decades ago. A no-contact order. Signed by Lorraine Reed. Evelyn stared at her mother's signature. It looked exactly like the one she used on permission slips and medical forms. Steady, unwavering. Was this court-issued? Evelyn asked, brows drawn tight. No, Wesley said. It was a private agreement. Legally binding, yes, but not criminal. She worked through attorneys. She didn't want Marcus near you. Not at school, not at home. Not even letters, unless she approved. Evelyn's jaw clenched. So she made it impossible for him to reach out. Wesley paused, choosing his words with care. She made it very difficult. Evelyn nodded slowly. And for the first time she felt something she never thought she'd feel toward her mother. Resentment. Not because Lorraine wanted to protect her. That, Evelyn understood. But because her mother never gave her a choice. Never gave her the option to know this man, flaws and all. I always thought she told me everything, Evelyn murmured. That we were a team, that I didn't need a father because I had her. Wesley didn't interrupt. Evelyn's eyes welled with quiet betrayal. I still love her, she said, voice cracking. But I don't know how to forgive her yet. Wesley gave her space. He didn't rush the moment. He just sat with her in the silence, allowing the weight of it to settle. Hours passed. The stack of letters was smaller now. She opened another without checking the date. Her eyes fell on one sentence, mid-page. I wonder if she likes books the way her mother did. Evelyn's breath caught. The page trembled in her hand. She closed her eyes and saw her 7-year-old self curled up on the living room floor, reading, by flashlight because the power was out and Lorraine had fallen asleep during her second shift. Books had been her escape, her passion, her obsession. And this man, this stranger, had wondered about it. Not in a vague way, not in some general, I hope she's doing well kind of way, but deeply, specifically. Does she like books the way her mother did? She set the letter down and pressed her palms to her eyes. Her shoulders began to shake. The tears came quietly, not because she missed him. How could she miss someone she never had? But because, for the first time, she felt seen by someone who never got to know her, and that feeling broke her in a way she couldn't explain. Later that evening, Evelyn and Wesley sat at the front counter. The shop was still technically closed, but the city hummed outside as if nothing inside had shifted. I can help you file the estate paperwork, Wesley said gently. We'll take it one step at a time. You don't have to rush anything. Evelyn nodded. But, she added, I don't want to be overwhelmed with lawyers or strangers who think they know what I need. Understood, Wesley replied. And I don't want sympathy, she added. He offered a faint smile. I didn't bring any. That made her laugh once. sharp, brief, but real. She looked at him. Wesley had been respectful, present, steady, and while she appreciated his help, she couldn't let herself lean on him. Not yet. Not after everything. Not when her heart still felt like it had been handed a stranger's diary and told, "This was supposed to be yours. I'll let you help," she said. "But this doesn't mean I trust you." Wesley's smile didn't falter. "I can live with that." And in that moment, Evelyn realized something. Healing didn't need to come all at once. Sometimes it came in small permissions, like allowing someone to walk beside you, even if you didn't hold their hand. The car ride was silent. Wesley drove, focused on the road, while Evelyn sat beside him, staring out the window. At a city she thought she knew, but today it felt like another universe. They headed north past neighborhoods with perfectly pruned hedges, cobblestone, driveways and gates that buzzed open like the world was waiting just for them. When they arrived, Evelyn forgot how to breathe for a second. The Thorne estate wasn't a house. It was a mansion. A modern limestone structure wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass with sharp lines, and manicured grounds that looked more like an art museum than a residence. Ivy crawled up part of the eastern wall, framing a balcony larger than her entire apartment. "This is where he lived?" she asked quietly, stepping out of the car. "Yes," Wesley replied. "For the last 18 years. It was beautiful, and ridiculous, and absolutely nothing like the two-bedroom apartment she'd grown up in above a barber shop on 63rd. She followed him through the gate and up the long path to the main entrance. As the heavy doors opened with a slow mechanical hum, the air inside hit her, not cold, not warm, just perfectly still. The foyer was a monument to silence, marble floors, art pieces she didn't recognize, a staircase that curved like it had been drawn by hand. Her sneakers squeaked slightly on the floor. She felt out of place, instantly, and it showed in her eyes. Wesley leaned in. "We don't have to stay long. I just thought it might help for you to see it." She gave him a small nod, but her heart was thudding. This was her father's world. This? How could someone live in this kind of wealth and never once walk through the door of the daughter he left behind? They moved to the back wing of the estate where a conference room, bigger than her entire bookstore, had been arranged for a private meeting. Evelyn walked into a space filled with glass, steel, and the hum of subtle power. A long table stretched across the room, surrounded by 10 chairs. Half were already occupied. 3 men and 1 woman stood as Wesley introduced her. "Everyone, this is Evelyn Reed, Marcus Thorne's sole heir." There was a moment. The kind where people glance sideways, assess, recalibrate. No one said anything out of line, but she felt it. The curiosity, the silent her. Wesley continued. "Evelyn will be reviewing the key components of the estate this week. She'll be taking an active role in understanding operations, asset management, and legacy planning." The woman, sleek blazer, tight smile, extended her hand first. "Alana Cross, family financial advisor for the last 15 years. Evelyn shook it. One by one, they introduced themselves, lawyers, fund managers, and Marcus's estate. Administrator, a man who looked more like a retired senator than a money man. They began. Balance sheets, real estate portfolios, corporate holdings, stocks, trusts. It was a blizzard of numbers and abbreviations. Evelyn's head spun. They spoke in code, using language designed to exclude the uninitiated. Wesley leaned in at regular intervals, translating under his breath. "That means they're advising you to roll the charitable arm into a private foundation. This part refers to property taxes on the Connecticut vineyard. That's a clause in the trust that lets you redistribute dividends if you choose." Evelyn took notes, nodded where she could, and pretended not to notice when one of the advisors paused to explain a basic term, not to help, but to patronize. But she noticed, and so did Wesley. When the meeting took a break, Evelyn stepped out to a side terrace overlooking a reflecting pool. She gripped the railing and let out a long breath. "You okay?" Wesley asked, joining her. She shook her head. "Honest, I'm trying." But this feels like a foreign film with no subtitles. You're doing better than you think, he replied. I don't even know what half those acronyms meant. That's why I'm here. Evelyn glanced sideways at him. But you talk like them. I was trained like them, Wesley said. But that doesn't mean I am them. She turned fully toward him. Why didn't he prepare for this? Why leave all this to a woman he never even met? Wesley exhaled. Because guilt doesn't follow logic. And Marcus, he thought this would be a gesture, a way to make up for everything. It doesn't feel like a gift, she said. It feels like a burden with windows. Wesley smiled faintly. You're not wrong. Silence stretched between them. Not awkward, just full. Evelyn looked back out at the still water. My mother used to say, the best kind of power is knowing how to make others feel seen. I didn't feel seen in there. Wesley nodded. They don't know you yet. And what happens if I never become what they expect? Wesley didn't hesitate. Then they'll have to adjust to you, not the other way around. She held his gaze. And for the first time since arriving, Evelyn exhaled without weight on her chest. Later that evening, Evelyn sat alone in the mansion's library, a room filled with leather-bound books, modern architecture, and too much silence. She thought she'd be impressed. She wasn't. She felt like an intruder walking through someone else's life in borrowed skin. She stared at the shelves. Some books were historical. Some were rare. Many were unread. None of this feels like mine, she whispered. Her reflection in the glass doors showed her in jeans, a soft sweater, curls, pinned up messily, a far cry from the polished lives she'd just stepped into, the wealth, the structure, the cold, hard polish of it all. It wasn't just intimidating, it was alien. Wesley stepped in quietly, holding a mug of tea. You left before dinner, he said softly. I wasn't hungry. He handed her the mug anyway. You belong here, you know, he said gently. Evelyn laughed once, dry. You have to say that. No, Wesley replied. I really don't. She looked up. He sat across from her, not too close, not too far. They expect me to walk in and be this legacy child, she said. But I didn't grow up in privilege. I didn't go to boarding schools or learn finance at 12. I grew up in a place where people measured success by whether your heat stayed on in the winter. And now, she added, they expect me to lead? No, Wesley corrected. They expect you to be quiet. But leading? That's your choice. And from what I've seen, you're more than capable. Her eyes met his. And for the first time, she didn't argue. The following day, another meeting was scheduled with the estate's senior legal representative, Harold Vensley, an older man who had managed Marcus Thorne's affairs for over 2 decades. From the moment Evelyn stepped in, Harold looked unimpressed. He gestured toward the seat at the head of the table but addressed Wesley instead. We'll keep things simple for Miss Reed. No need to overwhelm her with the finer points. Evelyn raised a brow, saying nothing. Wesley cleared his throat. I think Miss Reed would prefer to speak for herself. Harold blinked. I meant no disrespect. You did, Wesley said calmly. Just the polite version of it. The tension thickened. Evelyn leaned forward, voice steady. I may not know the jargon, Mr. Vensley, but I understand respect. And if you plan to work with me, you'll need to remember that I'm not a proxy. I'm the heir. Harold hesitated, then nodded stiffly. Understood. After the meeting, Evelyn turned to Wesley. You didn't have to do that. I didn't do it for you, he replied. I did it because you deserved better in that room. That wasn't charity. That was clarity. She looked at him for a long time. No rush, no pretense. Just truth. And in that moment, Evelyn felt something shift, not in her mind, but somewhere deeper. A sense of grounding. A sense that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't walking through this alone. The tires of the black town car rolled over familiar pavement as Evelyn stared out the window at the block she had called home her entire life. The quiet rows of brick buildings, the kids pedaling bikes too fast, the old man sweeping his front steps with jazz playing low from a radio sitting on a milk crate. Her world, still here. But she wasn't the same. She stepped out of the car and onto the cracked sidewalk outside Read Between the Lines, her bookstore. The bell above the door sang the same gentle chime, and the scent of roasted coffee and old paper greeted her like an old friend. But she couldn't ignore the feeling that something inside her had shifted. She walked behind the counter like she always did, set her bag down, and ran her hand over the worn wood where generations of fingertips had brushed. Students, elders, dreamers, single mothers looking for escape between pages. Everything looked the same, but she wasn't the woman who'd locked this door 3 days ago. She was now the heir to an empire, a stranger's legacy written in square footage and signed checks. She'd seen her father's mansion. She'd sat in rooms with lawyers and wealth managers. She'd touched letters written by a man who shared her blood, but never her memories. Now, back in her neighborhood, in her element, Evelyn realized she was carrying 2 lives inside her. And no one here had any idea. The neighborhood didn't miss much. By noon, 3 regulars had already popped their heads in. "You been away, baby?" Miss Trina asked, arms full of collard greens she was taking to her sisters. "You missed second Sunday service. Choir was offbeat without your claps." Evelyn smiled gently. "Just needed a few days." Trina narrowed her eyes like she could sniff out a half-truth. Well, if you find yourself needing more days, bring a casserole next time." The door chimed again, and Deshawn from the barber shop walked in holding a stack of his monthly magazines. "Evelyn, thought you disappeared." "I'm right here." He looked at her. Really looked. "Nah. You here, but something's different. Your eyes quieter. You ain't fidgeting with the register like usual." She offered a weak smile. "Guess I'm just tired." He said, unconvinced, before setting down the magazines and leaving. Even her staff noticed. Rachel, the teenage assistant who helped run the children's corner, asked softly, "You okay, Miss Evelyn? You look like you cried out something big." Evelyn paused. She could have lied, but she didn't. "I'm okay, Ray," she said. "Just walking through a story I didn't expect." The girl nodded like she understood, even if she didn't. And Evelyn appreciated that, because while everyone could feel the difference, she wasn't ready to explain the weight she now carried. How do you tell people you're no longer sure who you are? How do you say, "I met my father, but only through paper, and I own his legacy now, a world I don't even trust"? You don't. So, she let her silence hold it for now. That night, Evelyn closed the shop early. She brewed a cup of tea and sat on the old porch swing outside her building, letting the air wrap around her like memory. The wind carried a faint rhythm of gospel music from an upstairs window, someone playing Shirley Caesar. It tugged something loose in her chest. She closed her eyes, and suddenly she was 9 again. Her mother beside her on this same porch, wrapped in a housecoat, sipping sweet tea from a mason jar, watching Evelyn draw hearts and stars in chalk on the sidewalk. They used to sit out there and talk about everything. God, dreams, books, heartache. Sometimes they'd listen to gospel. Sometimes they'd turn on jazz. Her mother had an old stereo she swore belonged to Miles Davis himself. And some nights they'd dance barefoot on the floor, Evelyn standing on Lorraine's feet, giggling as they moved in small circles. "This world will try to define you by what you don't have," her mother once said. "But you better know what you do have, or you'll believe them." Evelyn opened her eyes again. The porch was older now. The swing creaked louder, but the love that had been built here, still strong. And in this moment, Evelyn remembered who she was, before lawyers, before mansions, before hidden names. She was a girl raised on late-night music, scripture, and survival. And she couldn't lose that now. The next day, Evelyn stopped by her godmother's house, a short walk from the store. Miss Inez had known her mother since they were teenagers, and Evelyn grew up calling her auntie without thinking twice. She knocked twice, then let herself in. "Front door's always open for you," Miss Inez called from the kitchen, stirring something that smelled like gumbo. Evelyn sat at the table. "You quiet," Inez said, not looking up. "I've had a lot on my mind." Evelyn stirred her tea. "A man showed up, a lawyer. Told me my father was someone else, a man I never met. He passed, left me everything. Miss Inez didn't flinch. Instead, she slowly turned down the stove burner and faced her. I always wondered if Lorraine would take that to the grave. You knew. I knew there was more to the silence than peace. Evelyn felt her eyes heat up. I feel like I'm losing myself, Auntie. No, baby, Inez said, sitting across from her. You're just being asked to stretch. That ain't losing, that's growing. Evelyn stared at the floor. Inez reached across the table, took her hand. You can go where money lives, she said gently, but don't lose where love raised you. Evelyn nodded, tears gathering but not falling. I don't know how to balance both. You start with this. Don't let them shame you for not knowing. And don't let the money change the way your heart listens. That night, Evelyn wrote those words down in her journal, because she knew she'd need them again. 2 days later, Wesley walked through the bookstore doors. Evelyn was shelving new releases when she heard the familiar chime. She turned. He didn't wear a suit this time, just jeans, a collared shirt, and a soft jacket. Still polished, but more like a person than a title. You open for visitors? He asked. I'm open for now. He smiled and stepped further in. The shop was alive with energy. A group of kids read on beanbags near the poetry wall. Miss Claudette, an elder from down the street, was reciting Langston Hughes to a high schooler working on a Black history project. Wesley paused. His eyes swept the room slowly. He saw the warmth, the history, the intention. This is yours? He asked. All of it. He walked toward the children's corner, pausing at a shelf labeled Voices. That raised us, filled with books by Baldwin, Walker, Hurston. He ran his fingers along the edge of the shelf. This place, he said quietly, feels like something sacred. Evelyn stood beside him. It saved me, she replied. When everything felt unstable, this was mine. He looked at her, really looked. I understand why Marcus wrote about you the way he did, he said. You carry something that roots people. Evelyn looked down, a smile playing at the corner of her lips. Don't go quoting my Yelp reviews, she said. He laughed softly. But the moment lingered, because in that room, surrounded by paper, voices, and the community that raised her, Evelyn felt seen, not for what she inherited, but for what she built. It was nearing the end of the week when Wesley walked back into the bookstore, with a quiet knock on the frame of the door, even though it was already open. Evelyn looked up from restocking new arrivals. You again? I brought peace offerings, he said, raising a small takeout bag with the unmistakable scent of garlic bread wafting from it. She raised an eyebrow. You think carbs fix everything? He grinned. No, but I do think they help grease the wheels. She chuckled, just a little, then turned to the register. What's in the bag? A preview, he said, stepping closer, of the kind of dinner I'm hoping you'll say yes to. Just one evening. No pressure, no business. Evelyn hesitated. Wesley didn't push. I know things have been heavy. I thought maybe something low-key might be good. There's a little Italian spot near the lake. Nothing flashy, no dress code, good food, better quiet. She stared at him for a beat, then back at the stack of books she was arranging. I'll go, she said. He blinked, surprised. Yeah? But I'm not calling it a date, she added quickly. Fair enough, he replied with a soft nod. We'll call it pasta and perspective. She allowed a small smile to break through. You're ridiculous. Only part-time. Later that evening, she pulled on a cardigan, tied her curls up, and met him by the entrance as the sun began to settle. Together, they walked down the street toward something she didn't yet have a name for. The restaurant was quiet, tucked between a record shop and a used furniture store. Dim lighting, brick walls, warm wood tables with mismatched chairs. They were seated in a corner booth by the window, soft jazz humming through. The air, the scent of roasted tomatoes and basil clinging to the atmosphere. No one recognized her here. No one whispered about inheritances or last names. For a while, they ate in silence, each bite a buffer against the nerves they weren't ready to name. Then, slowly, the walls lowered. Wesley shared first. He spoke of growing up in a small town in Missouri, raised by a single dad who worked 2 jobs and still found time to coach Little League. His mother had passed when he was young, and her absence had been a silent ache in his home, the kind that shaped his quiet nature. Evelyn nodded along, spooning up soup slowly. "I always thought I'd grow up and fall into something soft," she admitted. "You know, love, like the kind in books. Turns out, the real stuff has jagged edges." He looked at her with quiet understanding. "Did he hurt you?" Wesley asked carefully. "More than once," she said, meeting his gaze. "But the worst part wasn't the pain, it was the waste. All the time I spent trying to convince someone I was worth choosing." Wesley lowered his eyes, letting that truth settle without interruption. She continued, "My mother was strong. She didn't leave room for much else. She worked, she prayed, and she told me never to wait on anyone who couldn't see my value. And yet, I did. Sometimes," he said gently, "we need to learn things in our own timing, even the hard way." Evelyn looked down, pushing her spoon in slow circles. "I lost her before I ever knew how much she'd been protecting me," she whispered. "And now, all I have are questions I'll never get to ask." The table fell silent again, but not uncomfortably so. They sat in it, grief, vulnerability, and something fragile forming between them. The server cleared their dishes and brought 2 cups of tea without being asked. Wesley stirred his slowly, while Evelyn stared at the window. Outside, the lake shimmered under streetlights. Couples walked by, laughing. Life kept moving. "I haven't let a man sit across from me like this in years," she said suddenly. Wesley looked up, surprised, but he didn't interrupt. "I don't mean dinner," she clarified. "I mean this, honest conversation. No masks, no positioning, no pretending to be fine so someone else won't get uncomfortable." He listened. "I got tired of being the strong one," she continued. "Tired of giving grace to men who didn't know how to hold space for mine." A pause. "I learned to keep my distance. It was safer that way." Wesley nodded slowly. "I don't blame you. I don't know what to do with someone who actually listens," she added, "or doesn't try to fix me, or doesn't leave when things get inconvenient." Her voice wasn't bitter, just tired. She folded her hands in her lap and glanced at him. "So if I seem cautious or distant, it's not about you. It's survival." Wesley leaned forward slightly, hands flat on the table. "I won't pretend to know your wounds, but I'm not here to take anything from you." That sentence hit her like a wave she didn't expect, and in that moment, Evelyn realized just how long it had been since someone offered presence without an agenda. Wesley didn't fill the space with promises. He didn't try to sweep in with solutions or comfort her with platitudes. He just sat there, present, letting her talk when she needed to, and letting silence be enough when she didn't. When she faltered mid-sentence trying to describe the ache of reading her father's letters, he didn't ask her to keep going. He just nodded, slow, empathetic, and waited. When she spoke about the bookstore, her community, and how being surrounded by stories had once made her feel powerful but now left her full of doubt, he said only, "That makes sense." And it did. Everything she shared, every fragment of confusion, guilt, strength, and sorrow, he treated it like it deserved space. Evelyn watched him closely throughout the evening. Most men she had known tried to fill the silence to soothe their own discomfort. Wesley, he wasn't afraid of quiet. He let it breathe. When their server returned to check on them, Evelyn politely waved him off. She didn't want to be interrupted. Not now. Not when something real was unfolding. By the end of the evening, she felt lighter, not because anything had been solved, but because she hadn't needed to explain her worth once. And in a world where she was constantly proving herself, that was rare. They walked out of the restaurant slowly. The night was quiet, the lake breeze brushing past them as if to give space to whatever was beginning to unfold between them. They strolled for a while in silence, shoes tapping the pavement. Evelyn kept her arms folded loosely across her chest, not guarded, just unsure. Wesley didn't press. When they reached the corner where their paths would split, her back toward the south side, him toward the loop, he turned to her. "Thank you," he said simply, "for letting me in. even a little. She looked at him, unsure how to respond. So she didn't. Instead, she just studied his face, how his features held warmth without insistence, how his eyes didn't search her for an invitation, but stayed open just the same. They stood there, suspended in something unspoken. Then, just before parting, he reached across the small space between them, slow, deliberate, and gently placed his hand over hers. No grip, no pull, just contact, warm, steady. She didn't pull away. For the first time in years, she let herself feel the weight of someone's touch without fear of what it might cost her later. Her heart didn't race, it steadied. And in that steadiness, something stirred, not fireworks, not fantasy, but something more honest, something like hope. The house was too quiet. Evelyn wandered alone through the marble halls of the Thorne estate, her steps echoing softly beneath towering ceilings. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just walking, thinking, trying to find footing in a life that still didn't feel like hers. It was on the second floor, tucked behind a set of double oak doors, that she found it. The library. Not a study, not a reading room, a full, floor-to-ceiling, two-story library. When she stepped inside, the air changed. It wasn't just still, it was intentional. Warm light spilled from antique sconces, painting gold lines across wood-paneled walls. Shelves stretched in every direction, filled with everything from historical biographies to classic black literature to business manuals annotated in the margins. A rolling ladder sat on tracks. A spiral staircase curved into a loft space above, where even more books waited. There were journals stacked neatly in a glass case bound in leather, dates written in black marker on their spines. She stepped closer and saw one dated 1995, Evelyn's birth year. Her breath caught. Marcus had written journals the year she was born. She opened one. Inside was a page written in sharp, deliberate script. She's out there somewhere. I wonder if she's smiling. Evelyn pressed her fingers to the ink, heart pounding. Her father, this man she never met, had been writing all along. The library wasn't just filled with knowledge, it was filled with him. Drawn deeper into the room, Evelyn moved toward a wooden cabinet tucked behind the desk. It was locked, small, carved with initials, MT. She hesitated. Something about it felt private. Still, her curiosity outweighed her restraint. She looked through the nearby drawers, eventually finding a key taped to the back of a desk drawer, old, tarnished, and forgotten. She unlocked the cabinet with slow fingers. Inside was a box, velvet-covered, small, about the size of a recipe tin. She opened it. Inside were three things. First, a delicate gold pendant on a fine chain, a single initial engraved on the back, E. Next, a folded note, yellowed with age. It read, "For her, when the time is right." And finally, a photograph. It was of her, Evelyn, maybe 2 years old, sitting on the curb outside her mother's apartment, curls wild, legs folded beneath her, holding a book in her lap and staring at something beyond the frame. Her mother wasn't in the shot, but someone had taken it, someone who had been there. Evelyn gripped the photo so tightly her knuckles ached. He had seen her, even if only from a distance. Marcus Thorne had watched her life unfold. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed the pendant to her palm, trembling. It wasn't the value, it was the intention. He had carried pieces of her, protected them, hidden them away in this space she now stood in, and no one had known. She didn't hear the door open. Wesley stepped inside, pausing when he saw her, standing in the middle of the library, shoulders shaking, hand clenched around something he couldn't yet see. He didn't call her name, didn't clear his throat. He simply stepped closer, slowly, until he was near enough that she could feel his presence without feeling watched. Evelyn didn't turn around. She wiped at her face with the sleeve of her sweater and kept staring at the photo she now held gently in her hand. "I didn't know this was here," she said softly. "I thought I was just walking, and I found it." "I'm glad you did," Wesley said, voice low. She finally turned. Her eyes were red, but her posture was still steady. He kept things. Little things, she whispered. A pendant, this photo, notes. He watched. Wesley looked at the items in her hands, then back to her eyes. I think he wanted to believe that someday you'd find them. She nodded slowly. I didn't think it would matter, she admitted, knowing whether he cared. I told myself it wouldn't matter. Wesley said nothing, because what could he say that didn't dilute the emotion in the room? Instead, he stayed still, close but not overwhelming, present but not consuming. And in that moment, Evelyn felt the difference. He wasn't trying to fix her grief. He was honoring it, letting it breathe. And in doing so, he gave her something far more valuable than answers. He gave her space. They didn't speak for a long while after that. Evelyn sat cross-legged on the old reading couch in the corner of the library, the pendant resting in her hand, the photo beside her. Wesley stood by the fireplace, reading the titles along the shelf silently. It felt like hours passed, though it was likely just one. Eventually, Evelyn broke the quiet. Wesley. He turned, patient. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. Why are you still here? He blinked, caught off guard, not by the question itself, but by the timing. Her voice wasn't accusing. It was open, wounded, but honest. You've done your job, she continued. You could have handed me the paperwork, walked away after that first day, collected your check and moved on. She swallowed, eyes narrowing slightly. But you stayed, even when I pulled away, even when I said I didn't trust you. Wesley walked forward slowly, careful not to fill the room with more movement than necessary. He stood near her but didn't sit. Do you want the honest answer? He asked. She nodded. Wesley lowered himself to sit on the edge of a low bench across from her. His tone didn't change. He didn't rehearse the words. He spoke them plainly, like truth didn't need decoration. Because I care, Evelyn, he said. And it stopped being work a long time ago. She stared at him, quiet, still, but her heart began to hammer in her chest. He continued, slower now. I told myself in the beginning that I was just here to deliver legal information, that this was another estate, another complicated file with emotional weight. I've done plenty of those. I know how to detach. I was trained to... He paused, eyes never leaving hers. But you weren't paperwork. You weren't a task. Evelyn blinked hard, but her tears didn't fall. I saw you walk into rooms that weren't built for you, he said. I saw you stand firm, even when no one made space. I watched you carry pain with dignity, not because you had to, but because you were raised that way. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. I stayed, Wesley said finally, because somewhere between all the forms and letters and meetings, I realized I wasn't helping a client. I was standing beside a woman I respected. Silence. She swallowed once, thickly. You care? He nodded. Deeply, Evelyn looked away, trying to collect herself. But in the stillness between them, something broke free, not with noise or chaos, but with clarity. She was no longer alone in this, not in grief, not in healing, not even in love, though she wasn't ready to name it yet. But it was there, forming, slow and sure. 3 weeks had passed since Evelyn found the photo and pendant in Marcus's library. She no longer flinched when walking the estate halls. The rooms didn't feel like a stranger's home anymore, not fully. They were becoming spaces she could fill with purpose. And purpose was calling. She sat in the study that morning, papers spread out before her, not contracts or corporate holdings, but handwritten notes, ideas, goals, plans. At the top of the page, the Lorraine Reed Scholarship Fund. She wanted to honor the woman who raised her with less than enough, who gave her strength without condition, who fought every day with quiet dignity. The scholarship would serve young black women in Chicago pursuing healthcare careers, nursing, social work, therapy. Fields Lorraine had held close. When she presented the idea to Wesley, his eyes softened. She would have been proud, he said. She deserves to be remembered. Evelyn replied. "Not as someone who kept secrets, but as someone who kept me alive. This scholarship, it's her story too." They worked together on the structure. Wesley brought in 2 trusted colleagues to ensure transparency and full control remained in Evelyn's hands. No board, no branding, no exploitation, just impact. By the end of the week, she'd allocated a portion of the trust Marcus left her to fund 10 scholarships annually, fully covered. No red tape. Her mother's name, once known only in hospital staff rooms and prayer circles, was now etched on the beginnings of something beautiful. But Evelyn wasn't finished. After the scholarships were in motion, she turned her attention to the one space that shaped her, the bookstore. She sat in the children's corner late one afternoon, surrounded by worn bean bags and shelves filled with illustrated stories. A young girl was reading aloud with effort, stumbling through a paragraph, until Evelyn gently corrected her pronunciation. The girl grinned wide and said, "Thank you, Miss Evelyn." It hit her all at once, how access to stories had changed her life, how it could change theirs too. That night, she scribbled a new idea onto paper napkins, sketching a concept she later presented to Wesley. "A mobile reading initiative," she explained. "A van outfitted with books, tablets, and tutors. We'll go directly into underserved neighborhoods. No waiting for people to come to us." He leaned forward, intrigued. "You're building more than charity. You're building equity. I want these kids to see words as tools, not walls," she replied. Within a month, Evelyn partnered with 3 community leaders and an education non-profit. She funded the purchase of 2 vans, converted them with small reading nooks inside, and hired local educators to lead workshops and one-on-one literacy sessions. They called it the Story Steps program. The first route launched on the west side, visiting public housing complexes and parks. Each child who signed up received a free monthly book box curated with culturally affirming stories and age-appropriate content. Evelyn visited each stop at least once a week, not for press, not for applause, just to remind herself what real change felt like. With growth came risk. Once word of Evelyn's initiatives hit the local press, people started circling, fast-talking consultants, financial advisors who just wanted to help, and donors who expected influence in exchange for contributions. Wesley caught it before she did. He intercepted 2 emails from a PR firm offering to elevate the brand of Evelyn Reed in exchange for a controlling stake in her projects. He brought the messages to her immediately. "They think you're just another woman who stumbled into wealth and doesn't know how to protect it," he said, jaw tight. Evelyn read the emails in silence, then calmly slid them into the trash. "Let's make one thing clear," she said. "This isn't for show, and I'm not for sale." Wesley smiled. "That's exactly why I respect you." To protect the integrity of her work, Wesley helped her form a private trust advisory, 4 hand-picked individuals, 2 from the community, 1 financial ethicist, and 1 attorney with a background in non-profit law. All vetted, all bound to non-controlling agreements, all required to sign values-based contracts. Wesley refused every commission offered. He didn't want a paycheck. He only wanted Evelyn to succeed without becoming another headline or cautionary tale. "You're not a story they get to write," he told her. She looked him in the eyes. "Then help me write mine." The Marcus Thorne name still held weight in real estate, investment circles, and certain corners of philanthropy. But Evelyn didn't want to erase him. She wanted to reframe him. So, together with Wesley, she launched the Thorne Collective, a new initiative aimed at transforming dormant or misused family holdings into community-driven opportunities. They converted an unused downtown commercial property into a business incubator for minority-owned startups. They leased unused farmland in southern Illinois to local co-ops, providing fresh produce to food deserts in the city. They redirected passive income from Marcus's lesser-known commercial assets into a fund for formerly incarcerated individuals re-entering the workforce. It was more than symbolic. It was structural. Wesley handled the negotiations, but Evelyn made every decision. She sat at the head of each table. She signed each agreement. She brought her bookstore notepad to every strategy meeting, her pages filled with handwritten questions that demanded answers. When a senior developer suggested that the Thorn name remain front and center in all branding, Evelyn responded, "This isn't about his power, it's about people who never had any," and no one argued with her again. The legacy was no longer just his. It was hers now, and she wore it differently, not with diamonds, but with purpose. They never labeled it, never said the words aloud, but it was there, in every glance, every moment of silence they didn't rush to fill, every late night reviewing documents with jazz humming low in the background. Evelyn and Wesley had become something, not defined, but undeniable. She noticed it in small ways, how he never touched her without asking, but always stayed close. How he remembered her coffee order, her favorite pen, her dislike for cold conference rooms. He noticed her too, how she paused before making hard choices, how she bit the inside of her cheek when overwhelmed, how her eyes lit up when children read confidently aloud. They spent more time together now. Long walks after community meetings, shared meals when work ran late, quiet mornings on the estate terrace, drinking tea before the day began. No one called it love. Not yet, but the room always felt different when the other walked in. One evening, as they finished loading books into the mobile van, Evelyn turned to him. "You still haven't asked for anything in return," she said. Wesley shrugged. "I've already been given more than I ever expected." She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for his hand, not out of gratitude, but connection, and he held it, just for a moment, just long enough for both of them to feel what was building. Something deep, something steady, something that didn't need to be rushed, because it was rooted. It was one of those evenings that sat heavy with unsaid things. The Chicago sky had softened into deep hues of lavender and ash, and the garden behind Marcus's estate breathed with early spring chill. Evelyn had just finished reviewing proposal drafts for the literacy program when Wesley appeared at the patio door, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, his eyes unreadable. "Want some air?" he asked, his voice soft but sure. She nodded, sensing something more was coming. They walked in silence, the sound of her flats brushing gravel blending with the wind rustling the hedge. Past the rose arbor, near a stone bench that looked over the tiny creek running along the edge of the property, Wesley stopped. "I've been trying to time this," he began, looking out into the water. "But life doesn't always give us perfect timing, does it?" Evelyn glanced at him, confused. "Time what?" Wesley turned toward her. "This moment, telling you something that's been building up for weeks, maybe longer." She took a breath. Her heart beat just a little faster. "I'm falling in love with you, Evelyn," he said, "and I know that might scare you. I know you've had reasons to close your heart, and if me, makes things harder for you, I'll walk away. I'll protect what matters to you, and I'll go. No questions, no pressure." The words hit her like a sudden gust of wind, strong and real. Her throat tightened, and for a moment she didn't know what to say. Not because it wasn't beautiful, but because it was, and it terrified her. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. The house was quiet. Even the faint hum of the security lights outside did nothing to soothe the ache curling in her chest. How could he say that? How could Wesley be so calm, so open, when she was still stitching herself together with threadbare trust? By morning, she was gone. Not far, just out, the way people fled when they weren't ready to face what they felt. She didn't leave a note, but her absence said everything. Wesley called once. She didn't answer. He didn't call again. Evelyn walked along the lake near Hyde Park, the same path she used to take with her mom. She watched joggers pass by, couples sharing quiet glances, and families with strollers. It made her feel like a stranger in her own skin, someone caught between the memory of pain and the possibility of love. How do you let someone in when every man before him used the key to wreck your peace? Her father had tried in death. Wesley had tried in life. And still, she couldn't breathe. By noon, she stood before her mother's headstone, the same modest, hand-chiseled marker she'd chosen on a rainy Tuesday 3 years ago. The flowers she'd left last month had wilted. She knelt, replacing them with fresh tulips, her mother's favorite. "I'm stuck, Mama," she whispered. "He said he loves me, Wesley, and I believe him, I really do. But every time I start to feel safe, something inside me pulls away, like I'm not allowed to have good things without losing them." The cemetery was empty, except for the sound of rustling trees. "Why did you never tell me about Marcus?" Her voice cracked. "Why did you carry so much alone? I'm doing everything to honor you, the scholarships, the programs, but it still feels like I'm breaking inside." She sat by the grave for nearly an hour, remembering her mother's resilience. Her laughter in the kitchen, the way she taught Evelyn to pray, even when the lights were off and the fridge was empty. Her mother's strength wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to love anyway. That revelation didn't come in lightning. It came slowly, like a wave moving through her soul. Love, Evelyn realized, wouldn't make the past disappear. But maybe it didn't have to. Maybe love just meant having someone to help carry the weight. Someone to see her as she was, with all the cracks and cautious silences, and still say, "I'm here." Wesley never demanded more than she could give. He didn't push, didn't guilt her into feeling. He just showed up, again and again, until his presence became the one thing she could count on. She stood and wiped her eyes, the wind brushing against her cheeks like her mother's touch. If she wanted a future, not just in business or in name, but in heart, she had to let someone in. She had to try. That night, long after the lights in the estate dimmed and Chicago settled into its night rhythms, Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, phone in hand, thumb hovering over Wesley's name. She hit call. He answered on the second ring. "Evelyn." She didn't wait. "I panicked," she said. "I felt everything all at once and I shut down. That's my default. Survival mode. I know it's not fair." She exhaled. "But I also know you meant what you said, and I needed time to let that sit inside me." He was quiet on the other end, listening, like he always did. "I'm not ready to give you everything," she said, her voice trembling. "But I'm ready to try, to see what this could be, with no masks, no pretending, just one moment at a time." There was a pause. Then Wesley's voice came through, warm and steady. "That's all I ever wanted, Evelyn. Just you, as you are." A silence followed. But it wasn't awkward. It was sacred. And in that moment, even from separate rooms, they were closer than ever before. 3 months after Wesley confessed his feelings, everything in Evelyn's life had shifted, not suddenly, but with a steady hum of transformation. She walked into the downtown law office wearing a soft cream blazer and jeans, her style, not corporate. She didn't blend in with the suits. She didn't try to. Her presence drew eyes not because of wealth, but because of the calm certainty she carried now. Today was the day everything became official. Wesley met her in the lobby, giving her a reassuring nod. No romantic flourish, no pressure, just quiet solidarity. "Ready?" he asked. She inhaled deeply. "More than I thought I'd ever be." Inside the conference room sat a small panel of attorneys. Not the overbearing crowd from earlier chapters of her life, no swarm of corporate advisors. Just the individuals she chose to keep. The lead attorney slid a folder toward her. "This finalizes full ownership transfer of all Marcus Thorne properties and holdings into your name. Once signed, you hold full authority." Evelyn glanced at Wesley. He didn't guide her hand. He didn't lean over her shoulder. He only said, "Take your time." She did. She read every term, flipping through pages slowly, her fingers steady. Months ago, she would have panicked at the formal language. Today, she recognized most of it, because she'd asked questions, demanded clarity, and learned. She reached the final page. A blank line waited, a name she was still learning to carry, Evelyn Lorraine Reed Thorne. She didn't adopt it legally, not yet, but the signature line reflected the legacy she was stepping into. With a calm exhale, she signed. Her hand didn't shake. When she closed the folder, the attorney said, "Congratulations, Miss Reed. The Thorne estate is now yours." She didn't smile with triumph. She smiled with ownership, not of wealth, of identity. Word traveled quickly. Within days, her inbox overflowed with invitations, corporations wanting her name, on their boards, philanthropic partnerships, speaking engagements, interviews. Some were respectful, many were opportunistic. Wesley brought her a stack of proposals, eyebrows raised. These are the urgent ones. Evelyn skimmed through glossy folders promising prestige she didn't care about. One proposal read, "Join our board to expand brand reach into diverse communities." She closed it immediately. Absolutely not. Another wanted her to invest in a real estate development project displacing low-income families. She pushed it aside. No one's losing their home for a profit I don't need. Instead, she redirected her attention to projects she did believe in. She expanded the Lorraine Reed Scholarship Fund, tripling the number of annual recipients. She launched a literacy mentorship program pairing high school students with college tutors. She began designing community-owned co-working hubs on the south and west sides, not to help the poor, but to honor communities ignored by policy and investment. During one meeting, a representative from a major corporation said, "Your involvement will elevate our brand." Evelyn leaned forward. "I'm not here to be anyone's brand. I'm here to build what matters." She declined 90% of the offers. Her power was in her no, just as much as her yes. One evening, while shelving books at Reed between the lines, Evelyn paused over a memoir by a young black poet who'd struggled to find a publisher willing to take risks. She whispered, "What if your story didn't have to fight this hard to exist?" The idea came quietly but hit with conviction. The next morning she told Wesley, "I want to start a publishing arm." He blinked, intrigued. A press that prioritizes black voices, emerging writers, kids who grew up like me, with stories but no doorway out. She didn't want it to be elite or exclusive. She wanted it rooted in accessibility, community, and truth. Within weeks, she converted the third floor of the bookstore into a small editorial. Office hired 2 independent editors from Chicago's creative scene, partnered with local artists for cover designs, launched a submission portal with no fees. The name came naturally, Reed Inc. Publishing. It felt like her mother's voice whispering through the walls. The first manuscript accepted belonged to a teenage girl from Bronzeville, who wrote poetry about navigating grief after losing her brother. Evelyn read the submission twice, tears warming her eyes. "This," she told Wesley, "is why we're doing this. Not profit, not prestige, purpose." Her bookstore wasn't just a sanctuary anymore. It was now a launchpad for stories the world needed to hear. Though Wesley remained deeply involved, he made one thing clear: this is your vision. I'm just here to support it. And he meant it. In meetings, he deferred to her voice. When journalists asked for quotes, he redirected attention to her leadership. When donors wanted his perspective, he insisted Evelyn speak first. She was used to men overshadowing her, taking credit for ideas, minimizing her expertise. Not Wesley. He walked beside her, not ahead. When the publishing arm hit paperwork delays, he stepped in as needed, but let her articulate the solutions. When the scholarship expansion required new legal structures, he guided her through options but let her choose. One afternoon, after a meeting with community stakeholders, one of the elders in attendance approached Wesley. "You must be proud of what you're building," she said. Wesley shook his head gently. "I'm proud of what she's building." That night, Evelyn noticed him observing her as she organized donation receipts at her dining table. "What?" she asked, smiling softly. "Nothing," he said. "Just watching you lead. It looks good on you." She felt warmth rise in her chest, not because of romance, but because someone finally acknowledged the strength she always had. A month later, Reed Inc. Publishing hosted its first open mic night. The bookstore overflowed, teens reading poetry, elders sharing stories, musicians humming gentle chords in the corner. The lights were warm, the atmosphere alive with creativity and belonging. Wesley stood near the back, leaning against a shelf, watching Evelyn command the room with quiet grace. She introduced each performer with authenticity. She hugged nervous first-time readers. She encouraged applause for voices that had never been uplifted before. When the young girl whose manuscript Evelyn accepted finished reading a poem about hope rising out of brokenness, the room erupted. Evelyn stood beside her, one arm around her shoulders, beaming with pride. Wesley felt something tighten in his chest, admiration mixed with awe. After the event, once the last guest left and the lights dimmed, he approached her as she rearranged chairs. "Evelyn," he said. She turned around, brushing a loose curl behind her ear. "Yeah?" He took a slow breath. "You were always meant to build something that matters." Her eyes softened. "And you were meant to remind me I could." They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. Their connection sat in the quiet, steady, undeniable, growing stronger with each chapter of the life she was finally choosing. The library looked different now, not because anything had changed. The shelves were still heavy with journals, annotated, books, and the quiet weight of Marcus Thorne's inner world. But because she had changed. Evelyn stepped inside slowly, fingertips skimming the polished wood of the doorframe. This room once felt like a vault of secrets. Now it felt like an inheritance of truth, one she wasn't afraid to touch anymore. Wesley followed behind her, closing the door gently so the sound echoed through the room like a soft heartbeat. "You haven't been in here much lately," he said. "I think I was waiting," she replied. "For what?" She didn't answer immediately. She walked to the center of the room, the exact spot where she once cried, discovering the photo of herself as a toddler. The pendant Marcus saved for decades still lay safely in her jewelry case. "I needed to meet myself again," she said finally. Not the version shaped by fear, the one shaped by choice. The library's warm light washed over her, illuminating the woman she had become. Steady, grounded, imperfect, but fully present. Wesley watched her quietly. He always did. Not with expectation, not with demand, but with recognition. This space had belonged to a man she never knew. Wesley cleared his throat gently. I wanted to give you something." Evelyn turned, eyebrows raised. "Another legal folder? Please say no." He chuckled softly and held out a book. A worn hardcover. The spine cracked from years of rereading. Evelyn recognized it instantly. One of the classics she kept in the bookstore, the kind she always recommended to customers who were searching for healing tucked inside fiction. "You own this already," she said, confused. "This one's different." She opened it. On the inside cover, in Wesley's clean handwriting, was a single line, "For the woman who taught me how to love with honor." Wesley. Her breath caught. She ran her thumb over the words, feeling their sincerity. "You didn't have to write this," she whispered. "I know. Then why did you?" He took a step closer. "Because you changed the way I see everything. Wealth, loss, purpose, myself. I wanted you to have something that wasn't tied to your father or the estate or responsibility. Something that came from me." Her eyes softened. "This is beautiful." "No," he said gently. "You're beautiful. Your courage, your growth, the way you lead, the way you love your community, the way you make space for others, even when you're still learning to make space for yourself." She swallowed hard, emotion tightening her chest. No man had ever spoken to her like this, not claiming, not demanding, not manipulating. Just truth. And truth had its own power. Evelyn closed the book, holding it to her chest. A quiet moment stretched between them. Not tense, not uncertain, just full. Wesley waited. He always waited. He never reached first, never assumed, never rushed her heart. Maybe that was why she finally stepped forward. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something honest rising from a place she once barricaded. She cupped his face with both hands. He inhaled sharply, eyes widening, not from surprise, but from reverence. "Evelyn," he whispered. She silenced the rest of his sentence with a kiss. Not a rushed kiss, not a desperate kiss, a grounded kiss. Slow, intentional, emotional, certain. A kiss from a woman choosing, not hiding. A kiss from someone stepping into love without running from herself. Wesley's hands rose, settling lightly on her waist. gentle, respectful, steady. He kissed her back with a kind of tenderness that felt like an answer to every wound she had ever carried. When they finally pulled apart, her forehead rested against his. "I've wanted to do that for a very long time," she breathed. "You have no idea," he murmured with a smile. She laughed softly, a sound she hadn't heard come from her own chest in years. Something inside her settled, not because the kiss solved anything, but because it revealed everything. They sat together on the rug in the center of the library, leaning against the old leather couch, sharing silence and warmth. Evelyn curled her legs beneath her, resting her head on Wesley's shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, not claiming her, just holding space for her to lean. "Do you ever think about how strange this is?" she asked. "This room, this estate, us, all the time," he said. "But strange doesn't mean wrong." She traced the spine of the book he gave her. "I used to think love had to be dramatic to be real, explosive, a battle you had to win." Wesley looked down at her. "And now? Now I think love can be soft." He kissed the top of her head. She continued, "It doesn't have to shout, it just needs to stay." The fireplace crackled. A soft breeze slipped through the slightly open window, stirring the corner of a journal page. Wesley reached for her hand, threading his fingers with hers. "You know," he said quietly, "your mother would be proud of you." Evelyn's eyes glistened. "You think so? I know so." He didn't say it for comfort. He said it because he meant it. She leaned in closer, exhaling slowly, not weighed down, but finally able to breathe freely. The estate no longer felt like a monument to a man she barely knew. It felt like the beginning of a life she was finally choosing on her own terms. Later that night, long after Wesley left with a soft goodnight kiss, Evelyn remained in the library alone. She stood in the center of the room, holding the pendant her father saved for her and the book Wesley gave her. Two men. One who watched her from a distance, one who stayed by her side. Two forms of love, one rooted in regret, one rooted in presence. She walked to the journal shelf, placed the pendant beside Marcus's earliest entry, and whispered, "I forgive you." Then she held Wesley's book, pressing it to her heart as she sank into the leather couch. Her voice narrated softly, almost like she was speaking a truth to her future self. Sometimes love isn't loud. Sometimes it isn't dramatic or overwhelming. Sometimes it just stays, not to fix you, not to claim you, but to walk beside you long enough for you to become who you were meant to be. She closed her eyes, exhaling with a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Evelyn Reed, daughter, leader, builder, survivor, had finally stepped into her own story. And love, late but true, stepped with her. The sun peeked through soft morning mist over the Thorne estate. Once a cold monument of secrets and silence, it now hummed with signs of rebirth. Evelyn stood on the balcony, barefoot, a silk robe draped around her, coffee in hand. The air smelled different now, lighter, like hope had settled in the stone walls. 1 year had passed, and with it, a life Evelyn never imagined had unfolded. Each week, she spent 3 days here in the estate, managing, growing, resting. The other 4 were back in her old neighborhood, where the real work happened. She refused to sever ties with the world that raised her. The estate had offered legacy, but the bookstore, that was still her heart. She moved between 2 worlds now, not torn between them, balanced within them. She no longer lived to escape her past. She carried it with pride. The woman who once stood small beneath the estate's looming gates was now its master, not by dominance but by healing it. The hallways no longer echoed with guilt. Instead, they rang with new conversations about poetry, publishing, outreach. Paintings by local artists hung where portraits of stern ancestors once glared. The garden had been reopened to community events. Children ran across lawns that had once been off-limits to their parents. Evelyn didn't just inherit the house, she redefined what it meant to own it. Back in the city, on the corner of Lyons and Cross, the little bookstore that had once struggled to keep its lights on now beamed like a lighthouse. Evelyn had never renamed it. Lightwell Books was still etched on the sign, faded but respected. Inside, it felt like home. The smell of aged pages, coffee, and ambition still filled the space. But now, the shelves were taller, the back room had transformed into a literacy hub, and the upstairs loft had become a community co-working space. She had poured resources into what mattered most: stories. Not just the ones in books, but the ones people carried. Reading programs were launched for local youth. Scholarships were funded for young women pursuing literature, publishing, or education. She partnered with schools that had no libraries, and every Friday night the lights dimmed and the floor opened for spoken word, poetry, and music from the neighborhood. Teenagers recited Maya Angelou beside elders who quoted Zora Neale Hurston. People cried. People laughed. They stayed. Wesley had called it the warmest place in the city. But Evelyn knew it was something deeper. It wasn't just warmth. It was belonging. Every voice mattered here. Every story had value. That had become her mission. She hadn't just expanded a bookstore. She'd built a movement out of memory. On most mornings at the estate, Wesley could be found on the porch swing, laptop in hand, hair tousled, eyes still half asleep. He no longer wore the hard CEO face he'd worn when they first met. He'd traded it for a quiet strength, the kind that didn't seek to lead, only to support. He'd stayed, not as a rescuer, not as a fixer, but as someone who knew that love meant showing up. Every day, Wesley never tried to take the spotlight. He helped where he could, connecting the bookstore with publishing grants, offering input on contracts, reviewing funding applications. But he never overstepped. It mattered to him that Evelyn remained at the center of it all. "People need to see you lead, Evelyn," he'd say. "They already believe in you. You just have to keep going." She'd glance at him some evenings while reviewing manuscripts or answering emails and catch him looking at her like she was the whole world. Not because she'd become powerful, but because she had stayed kind, whole, fierce, soft. In the quiet of their shared nights, when she rested her head on his chest, listening to the rhythm of his breath, they didn't need to speak about what they'd become. It was already understood. Wesley hadn't just stood by her side. He had let her stand in front, and that was the greatest gift he could have given her. In her office at the estate, just above her bookshelf, sat a framed photo she'd placed by herself. On the left, her mother, Elena Barnes, smiling beneath a magnolia tree. One hand on her hip, the other shielding her eyes from the sun. On the right, Marcus Thorne, young and proud in a black and white portrait, one she had once been afraid to touch. Two different worlds, two legacies, two wounds she'd carried her entire life. And yet, in this simple frame, they coexisted, no longer in conflict. Evelyn would sometimes sit back and stare at them, those faces, those lives, those decisions. She'd cry. Not out of sorrow, but out of gratitude, because for all the pain, those two people had given her the pieces she needed to become whole. From Elena, she inherited fire, grit, soul. From Marcus, she inherited power, access, space. But it was Evelyn who had bridged them. She had rewritten the ending. And now, children in her community had books to read. Single mothers had free tutoring for their kids. The old estate that once locked her mother out was now hosting workshops for women like her. That photo wasn't just a memory. It was a declaration. The past didn't have to define you. It could teach you how to begin again. That night, Evelyn stood by the back porch of the estate. A poetry night had just ended. The laughter of young girls still echoed faintly in the distance. She held a warm mug of cinnamon tea, the same her mother used to make. Wesley joined her without a word, their shoulders touching, silence speaking everything. She looked up at the stars. There had been a time she thought she'd never be enough, that the world had already written her story, and she was only allowed to survive it. But here she was, thriving, loving, leading, healing. She had built something that mattered, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. She turned to Wesley, her voice steady. "This wasn't the life I planned," she said softly. "But it became the story I was meant to tell." He squeezed her hand. "No need for more. They stayed there, not in a fairy tale but in truth, a love that had been tested, a legacy reclaimed, and a future unwritten. If this story touched your heart, don't scroll away. Like, share, comment, and hit that subscribe button, because your next chapter could be one moment away.